Witam serdecznie Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our debate, what kind of Poland in what kind of Europe? Question that we traditionally leave for the very end of the world in focus. For the past 2 days, we've been discussing about what's going on in our societies. We've been discussing challenges ahead of us, but the final question, because we are in Poland, in Warsaw, so the final question for this edition of The World in Focus is what kind of Poland in what kind of Europe? What's going on in Poland? What's Poland's position in the EU and what direction is Poland going? As we've heard for the past 2 days, we are in a breakthrough moment, a critical moment when it comes to international affairs in Europe and in Poland. We are ahead of interesting elections, EP elections. The entire 2019 will be very interesting, lots of interesting elections. A lot of debate is taking place on elections and on the place of Poland in Europe, as well as the place of Europe in Poland. This panel, the last panel of this gathering, is very interesting to us because we are presenting to you an interesting initiative of the Polish public life. It is called Spięcie. Different kinds of ideological profiles, which gives us an opportunity to talk to one another. Each month, Spięcie writes an article that is then published on numerous web pages, and the idea is to reach people with this kind of message, which is opposed to the messages, the news that we get every day from the media. I'm really glad to be able to introduce our panelists, representatives of the 5 parties to the Spięcie project. We've got Dominika Gmerek from Krytyka Polityczna, Łukasz, Kobeszko, Nowa Konfederacja, Piotr Trudnowski, Jagiellonian Club, Łukasz Pawłowski, commentator of Kultura Liberalna, Stanisław Zakroczymski, Kontakt magazine. Ladies and gentlemen, Irene talked about the topic of this debate. I hope you will be involved in this debate as well. We will talk about the place of Poland in Poland and the place of Europe in Poland. This question will be asked to all of the panelists. We all know that in recent months, years, Europe has played a crucial role for the Polish public life. It seems that it also has been a subject of huge controversy in Poland. But I don't want to focus on what's been going on in Poland for the past couple of months or 2 or 3 years. I would like to take a deeper perspective and think about where today, after 14 years of Poland's membership of the European Union, where is Europe as a political reality, political idea? where is it present in the Polish social and political landscape? Has anything changed significantly in the past months, in the past years? The support for the European Union in Poland is quite high. It has not changed, which might suggest that there have been no profound changes, but we have the impression that our attitude towards the West is changing. People say that we no longer want to copy solutions from the West. Europe is no longer a mythos for the Polish people. So I would like to hear your opinion on what you think about the evolution of the place of Europe in the Polish social and political life. Is there any volunteer to begin? Łukasz? Well, something has definitely changed. Piotr sent us an email in which he stated that the mythos of Western Europe is over. This is a quote from the editor-in-chief of my journal, and I think that he's right. When we got from real socialism into the idea of capitalism that we had, this was kind of obvious. There was just one direction to go. We wanted to be part of Europe. We want to live in normal, ordinary world. We wanted our world to be colorful and peaceful. But Ziemowicz-Szczerek wrote a sentence in which he stated that after some time we realized that all those colorful neons in the streets of the West are not some extraordinary things. They're just neons of Lidl, Aldi and other supermarkets. This means that we are disillusioned with the West and we are a bit disappointed with the West. Of course, this is also influenced by the refugee crisis, financial crisis, tensions between the US and Europe, tensions within Europe resulting in Brexit and the discourse around this Brexit. So we are now in the middle of the circle. We are not outside. That's just like with the family. When you have a look at a family from the outside, you might think, well, they love one another. But when you are a member of this family, you might know that this is not the case. Another situation, another notion that describes the change that's been going on in Poland quite well is the way of thinking presented by Ivan Krastev, a political scientist from Bulgaria, who claims that Central Eastern Europe citizens are like third and second generation of migrants in the West. If someone comes to the Western Europe from Africa, for instance, they are happy that they were able to reach Europe, that they were able to find job, and they want their kids to have better life, and they are okay with the working, doing some very simple things, although they're highly educated. They just want to secure better future for their kids. But if it's second or third generation migrants and they are still treated in a worse way than the nationals, well, they have no place to go to. They don't remember the fact that in the past the lives of their parents were even more miserable, and this gives rise to frustration. So Krastev claims that current Europeans from Central Eastern Europe could be equal to third, second generation of migrants in Western Europe. So they can be full of frustration. And also imitative modernization that we were subject to is humiliating to a certain extent, because if we copy someone's actions, we assume that this person is better than we are, wiser or anything. So what should we do? I don't know what's the situation in other countries in Central Europe, but we should convince Poles that they are no longer outside Europe. They joined Europe, they are in the middle, and they are responsible for the fate of Europe to the same extent that the citizens of other countries. And the rhetorics used by both parties to the conflict, political conflict in Poland, does not encourage such attitude. But we will talk about this later on. Those who are Eurosceptical use rhetorics that does not facilitate working out a different attitude towards thinking about Europe. Now, question to Mr. Trudnowski, referring to what Łukasz said about the reluctance to imitating Western world. I have the impression that the Jagiellonian Club mentions this very often. It talks about mistakes that Europe made. Well, I would like to refer to what's been said, and I would like to ask to the question asked by the moderator about the place of Europe in Poland. I think that it changed for the better during the last decade, because the attitude of Poles towards the European Union 10 years ago was kind of magical. I agree with what Łukasz said. We thought that we aspired to be members of the European Union. We did not feel that our place is in Europe, within the structures. And then we started to function within the European Union, but we were, so to speak, de-empowered. We had no sense of responsibility, and nowadays our attitude is much more ordinary. Just like in any kind of political alliance, any kind of organization, any kind of union, we feel that we should evaluate this alliance taking into account some variables, and I think that there are two variables that should be particularly taken into account and are taken into account by Poles, and they verified their attitude towards the European Union via the filter of these variables. And first of all, this is the feeling that the participation of the membership of the alliance could be reconciled with the feeling of sovereignty. And I think that the answer of Poles to these questions is yes. Polish people benefit from the participation in the European Union, and these two things could be reconciled. And the second variable is whether it is reconcilable, it is possible to be reconcile the values of Poland and the values of the European Union. Well, it is kind of obvious that the values of the European Union are quite similar to the ones of Poland. The European Union is quite close to Poland, and I think that the situation we have now is much more ordinary than it used to be 14 years ago when we joined the European Union. And I think that this does not depend on divisions such as left-wing parties, right-wing parties, conservatives, liberals, but it is up to generational change. Nowadays, young Poles think and take it for granted. They take for granted the presence of Poland in the European Union, in all these structures. And young Poles have the conviction that if Poland leaves the EU, that's not because it will be dismissed because of the things it does bad, but because it simply wants to. On a very symbolic level, I was born in 1989, so on the 1st of May 2004 I was in junior high school. And I can remember the day when Poland joined the European Union, and the headmaster of my school, which was kind of cool. I attended a school in Grudziądz, and he sympathized with the Unia Wolności, and he said, okay, let's stage a march of freedom. And we were organized a march because of the fact that we joined the European Union, which was not acceptable for us. We didn't want to attend this march because we didn't like the European Union. There were lots of ultra-globalist tendencies right now, and it was obvious for us that joining the European Union was not that great, that we should stage a march, have some balloons and flags in our hands and walk merrily and sing songs. And I think that now we are a bit disillusioned, but this results from the fact that our attitude towards the European Union is much more ordinary than in the past.
Łukasz would be more liberal, and you would represent the left-hand side of the political scene. From your perspective, from the left-wing perspective, how would you describe the place that Europe takes in Polish politics? Has anything changed as regards how we see the European Union? Or maybe you would agree with Łukasz. Well, I would like to refer what my colleagues have been saying. And let me start with a narrative crisis that we are experiencing nowadays. Since 2004, we've been talking about the European Union as something that is beneficial for us in economic terms. So all Polish people have this idea that Poland is making a profit from being a member of the European Union. And we conducted research as a global lab. We interviewed conservative voters to examine how people see the European Union and how they imagine the role of the European Union. And we wanted to talk to ordinary people, to normal people. Those people were interviewed, and we asked questions like, what is European Union? Why are we a member of the European Union? Everyone said the same thing. We are a member of the European Union because we benefit from this in financial terms. However, when we asked why there are other countries in the European Union who are the net payers, and we asked why is it so? Why do they remain members if they are net payers? And they said, well, we don't know. There was a challenge for them to answer that question. So they associated the membership of the European Union with being a country that receives more than it pays in. And I think that the European Union was seen as a Western model of life. And the Polish people thought or had that feeling that they were working very hard, and this needs to be appreciated. And people wanted change in Poland. I think some years ago we had this situation, this narrative about the European Union, that we need to catch up, and that this catching up with the European Union will take us some 20 years. This is what Polish people were told. You need to go and work for 20 years, and maybe after 20 years you will be able to catch up with the western part of Europe. This is gone. Now people do not have that patience. They don't want to wait for 20 years. They want to have all those standards of living right now. They want to breathe clean air, for example, and they don't want to wait. They want to have more free time. They don't want to work all the time. And as regards the Spięcie project, Spięcie would mean tension in Polish. This is the name, the title of that project. When we looked at the narrative about the European Union represented by different political parties in Poland, we will see that the Law and Justice Party does not have a problem leaving its own bubble. Recently, the narrative of those politicians has changed because they are clearly reading different reports, including those published by left-wing think tanks, like a report you co-authored in 2016. And in that report, the authors indicated that the Law and Justice Party did not propose a strategy for development which would be different from that proposed by the European Union. And this has changed now because the Law and Justice Party is now saying we will catch up with Europe by adopting our own model of development and not just following the European traditional model of development. So there is this shift in the narrative about the European Union adopted by the Law and Justice Party. And I think credibility is a very important thing here, because we need to show clearly that Poland needs to be a member of the European Union on an equal footage. Otherwise, we will not be able to catch up with it. And now a question to the other participants, to the other panelists of our debate. Is it possible to imagine a development without the European Union? Is it indeed something new, something that was added to this narrative about the European Union some weeks or months ago? Or maybe you see it differently. Is it possible for Poland to develop independently from the European Union? Ladies and gentlemen, well, I would put it like this. So far, I can agree with what you've been saying. It is indeed true that a certain period is over in Poland now. How could we describe that period? That would be a period of some naive enthusiasm towards the European Union. That was understandable some 15 years ago, because the elites, the Polish elites, thought that this would be the end of history as pictured by Fukuyama. And no one was thinking about what would come later. It was like the achievement and the end of history. We had a referendum and Polish people voted for joining the European Union. It was not that easy to make Polish people vote for joining the European Union, and it was very difficult to have a sufficient turnout. However, in the end, that referendum was successful, and Kwaśniewski, our president, said that Polish people had voted, and that was it. And for years that came later, nothing really changed. We were just happy with what had already been achieved, and no one was really thinking about the future. The politicians were just repeating the same things. It was a narrative focused on catching up with the West, with the old members of the European Union. All the conferences, seminars organized at that time were repeating that message again. It was the message about the necessity of catching up.
Szansa na właśnie to, że po pierwsze to jest w ogóle dobre zjawisko, że
And now I think it's good that that period of naive enthusiasm towards the European Union is gone. We used to have those political slogans which were very simplistic, like "I love the European Union," for example. That is definitely over. Now we see the European Union in a less magical way and in a more realistic way. Because we need to feel like we are a partner, like an equal partner, not a worse one that needs to catch up. And if you have a community, there will always be members that will be less satisfied. There will always be problems you will need to cope with. And I think it's good that that period of naivety is over, because this also means that Poland will be able to join the decision-making process in the European Union and contribute to that decision-making in the long term. Because this is, of course, not good to just to be critical. You need to offer alternative solutions. You need to make your propositions. If you just keep criticizing the European Union, this is no good. And this is something the Polish government is doing right now. And that conflict with Brussels has been in place for over 2 years now. I mean, this conflict regarding the rule of law in Poland. And the Polish government has been criticizing the European Union a lot, and I think there is nothing behind it, because it's always easy to criticize. It is much more difficult to offer alternative solutions. It's easier to criticize than to join the decision-making process and offer alternatives. Let me give you 2 examples. Example number 1. When we now listen to Polish politicians from the Law and Justice Party, there was a conference of the Visegrad V4 countries, and our president Andrzej Duda repeated that narrative, saying that Poland, after overcoming communism, is still lagging behind and still needs to catch up. It's still so that we can have the same standard of living as people in the West. We are still lagging behind and we need to catch up. But I have not heard a proposition as to how the European Union should be reformed. So there is no constructive criticism. We just focus on that conflict regarding the rule of law being endangered in Poland. There was a lot of criticism, but there was no real alternative. Ms. Szydło, Mr. Morawiecki have said on numerous occasions that the national parliament should have more powers, but they don't go into details, unfortunately. And now Ludwig Dorn has published an article about this, and he proposes that there should be a large-scale debate all over Europe about giving the member states a right to go to court and challenge the decisions of the European Union that violate certain principles, such as solidarity, for example. Because I would say that, well, you would certainly agree with me that this should be the main principle of the European Union, the principle of solidarity. And when I think about how the European Union could be reformed, I would opt for a European Union which would be inclusive. And that equality principle, that solidarity principle, subsidiarity principle should be the main principles in the future as well. And Ludwig Dorn was saying in that article that we needed a common initiative taken by the national parliaments. Let me interrupt. I like the ideas you are talking about, but we will refer them later during the second round of this debate, during which we will be talking about definitions of certain problems that Poland will need to focus on. But before we start the second round of debate, I would like to offer Mr. Zakroczymski a possibility of expressing his voice.
I will try to take a philosophical perspective, but let me first give you 2 introductory remarks referring to what's been said. I would like to totally agree with the previous speaker. We should not underappreciate the anti-European rhetorics of the current government, which is going to make us some troubles very soon. And then let me give an additional introductory remark. I've heard a lot of times that we need to feel in Europe at home, but it follows from research that we do feel at home in Europe. And a very interesting piece of research was published by an American NGO which cooperates with the Institute of Political Studies in Poland, research conducted on people between 18 and 30 in Poland, Slovakia and Hungary. Very interesting conclusions regarding many topics and very interesting results of a study on identity. It was not about the support for the European Union, but the question was asked whether you identify yourself with the value of Europe. And it turns out that 80% of young Poles identifies with this value completely. 3/5 of Poles claim that they identify to a certain extent, and it is only 15%. It is only 1/5 of young Poles that do not identify with Europe at all. So the results are much better in Poland than in Hungary and Slovakia. It would be interesting to take into account these data. And now, moving on to the two slogans that I would like to come up with here. Instead of imitation, inspiration. And let me explain what it's all about. I'm not only a writer, journalist, but I'm also a lawyer. And in the law, there is two kinds of application: direct application and respective application. Application per analogia. So we take into account the specifics of a particular case, or we do not take into account the specifics. And I think that we should come from this general application to application per analogia. I agree with the fact that we were catching up with the West for many, many years. But I think this process of catching up is over, and I think that Tusk understood it in 2010, that it's no longer time to catch up with the West. Another question is, what conclusions did he draw from this statement? But it turns out that aspirations of young Poles are growing at a very fast pace. Contrary to Hungary or Slovakia, the first political problem on the agenda is not unemployment or corruption. These issues are important, but they are not the most important ones. What's most important for Poles is health service and cost of living. Unfortunately, there was no question about the environment, which I personally regret. But it seems that aspirations are rising. When it comes to complicated issues such as public services, it is not possible to simply copy and paste. We can learn in an intelligent way from the West. But I think that local communities have to play a role here. For instance, cities. There is an initiative called C40, which affiliates 40 huge cities which exchange experience on climate change, for instance. There are no Polish cities present in these initiatives. At least 2 Polish cities could be part of it, but they are not. And then one more thing. We've got this autonomy of hope on the one hand and fear on the other hand. For many, many years, the word that was associated with the European Union was hope. Today, those who are in power try to use the European Union to threaten us. They tell us that the European Union tries to impose certain bad things on us, that it wants to do us harm. So if we want to support the idea of integration, and those in power are against this innovation, they need to think about how to reconcile European integration with hope. But this hope should be located somewhere above the notion of simply poverty, because economic progress of a country is kind of obvious. Okay, so let's now get from hope to concrete solutions. What can we expect from the government? During the second round, we will talk about this, and then we will ask all the people gathered here to ask questions and make comments. So, the first question regarded place of Europe in Poland, and now we would like to take a different position. We joined the European Union 14 years ago. We are 3 years after very important elections, parliamentary elections in Poland. So what are the most important dilemmas, challenges for Poland right now? What kind of European policy should we expect from the Polish government? Could you please name one dilemma that you find the most important, dilemma or a challenge that we need to respond to? One by one, please name the dilemmas and challenges you think are most crucial.
Wymienić na samym początku.
Well, I could name a few, but please just one.
Dobrze,
You
przede
should
wszystkim więc powinny być
choose one
działania,
priority.
Polska się powinna w to czynnie włączyć na rzecz przywrócenia dość tego zachwianego i w wyniku
I think that we need to, well, we had the crisis, the financial crisis, the crisis in Greece, and I would call it a crisis of solidarity. And I think that Poland should contribute to solving this problem of solidarity and this problem of distrust towards the European institutions, because they are getting more and more isolated from the societies. People do not believe in those institutions anymore, they don't trust them, and this is a serious problem we should tackle, and Poland should contribute to this. I think this would be a priority. This is something very important to me. So if we have projects, for example, which are not in compliance with principles such as the solidarity principle or equality principle, they should be rejected straight away. Or the subsidiarity principle, for example. If the subsidiarity principle is violated by a project, that project should be rejected straight away. And it's very important to show that the European interest is not contradictory to national interests, which is today very often talked about. It should be important to show the people that the European Union could be a platform that makes it possible to act and to follow the national, to act in the national interest, but with a bigger scale that is offered by the European Union and our membership of that union. The European Union is also an area with a huge population, and it should be able to make its voice heard worldwide when it comes to equality, when it comes to human rights, when it comes to a reasonable approach to international affairs that should have a moral component as well. We can still serve as a role model, we the Europeans, and I think that Poland should contribute to this, which is not the case right now. So when we are talking about the solidarity principle, for example, we often mention that our role is still not big enough, that we lose a lot because our voice is not heard in Brussels. So I think the solidarity is also something which is very symbolic in Poland because of that trade union solidarity in the 80s. We should build on this, that would see this crisis of solidarity as the most important one, and I would like to go back to promoting Europe as a community based on solidarity solidarity, and I wish Poland could contribute to this to make it clear that being a member of the European Union is not that the interests of the European Union are not contradictory to the national interests. So what kind of politics can we expect from the European Union and the government in Poland, and what topics will be crucial in the campaign before the European elections? I would like to talk about three things, but they will not all address the government, but it doesn't matter, I think. I will say that our generation believes that the future of the European Union does not depend on Poland, that the major threats are locating elsewhere. And I think that that threat is usually seen with the Western elites, political elites. And I think that they should open for that scenario that would involve the European Union doing less but doing better. Sometimes it's better to do less but do it in a better way than to do more and have a worse quality. And that would be the view taken by the young generation in Poland. What can be done to make the Polish voice heard more in Brussels? I think that we need a breakthrough, because there is still a complex of the Polish society towards the Germans. And you can hear this when you listen to Morawiecki or to Kaczynski. They are sure that we still have resentments towards Germany, which are based on an inferiority complex. And I am sure that many liberal elites in Poland have shaped their relationship, their attitude towards Germany on the basis of that inferiority complex. And the young generation has already understood that we are part of the European Union, and that gives us the possibility of talking to the Germans on an equal footage. This is really clear for the young generation, but less clear for the older generation. And I think there is no way around this. If we want our voice to be heard in Brussels, we need to approach Germany on an equal footage, on equal terms. And this is the main message for the Polish government right now, to make sure that this is the case. And another topic, if you support the European Union, and I mean all organizations, all people that are not 100% Eurosceptical. I mean all those who want to reform the European Union. I think we should go in this direction. We need a European Union that does less but in a better way. And I think this is realistic. But in order to make this happen, we need to bring the European Union closer to the people, so that ordinary people are able to understand what the European Union is all about. And that's why this left-wing thought might be very interesting now, because we need to bring the European institution closer to the people. I would call it Euro-realism. But unfortunately, this idea is not popular in Europe right now.
rozwiązania, które będzie zrozumiałe dla wszystkich obywateli Unii Europejskiej.
I think that we need solutions that will be understandable for all the societies in all the member states, but it's very difficult to find one. We would need a project like this benefit for kids in Poland, 500 plus. This is something that has made the Polish government very popular, so we would need something that will make the European Union popular as well. Well, 500 plus benefit for kids as part of the campaign before the European elections will be very interesting.
Yeah, I would agree with the last one, but I was to focus on one thing. So I think that Polish government should promote solidarity, but this is not going to happen because our government conducts the politics of war with the European Union. And 3 days ago, politicians staged a war against the Court of Justice of the European Union. If there is, well, this can't be civil war because we feel as part of this community. So this is not a war against the European Union, but a civil war. Yeah, but I think that we cannot sit at the negotiating table in this community. We are staying somewhere in the corridor waiting for someone to ask us to come inside. Article 7 procedure was launched against us, and we could theoretically talk about what Poland could contribute to the European Union, and I'm talking on the basis of my experience, but also the experience of other people whom I talk to. But so for me, the rule of law is the most important one. We have to we have to treat the rule of law as the point of departure if we want to contribute anything to the European Union. If French politicians say that they are no longer financing states such as Poland, well, what can we do? I think that the role of European Union is growing. But when in Hungary the situation was similar than the situation in Poland, the Court of Justice of the European Union said, okay, there are some irregularities, but in general it's not that bad. But the European Union said or thought that they are based on their community based on law and not on coercion of any kind. That's why I think that the first thing we need to focus on is to convince our citizens, and we have to wonder how can we do that, that our benefits from the European Union result from the fact that we are in a common legal area, and this cannot be done in using the language that I'm using here. We need to change our attitude. We need to start to build this European community on the basis of some emotions. For instance, constitutional patriotism, as this was called in Germany. We need this kind of attitude for Poland and for Europe. We should stop treating the European Union as a kind of bank providing us with funding for different kinds of projects. We need to be bound with the European Union by some emotions. We need to be linked to the values represented by the European Union in an emotional way. We need to solve this problem first before we move on to other issues. And now, Łukasz, what can we expect from the liberal camp? What's the main challenge according to you? What should the Polish European politics look like? You will have a chance to respond to one another's statements. We'll have some time for rooms from for questions from the room. But first, let's finish this debate. Well, the fact that we depart from this magical thinking about the European Union does not necessarily mean that we move on to a realistic thinking. Well, I would not say that we are realistic in our thinking about the European Union. Everyone can claim they're realistic, but I think that the two parties make the same mistake. Maybe in the youngest generation that's a bit different, but the reality is that the Polish politics has never been that old as it is nowadays. If you check the average age of parliamentarians and other groups of people holding official positions in Poland, it turns out that those who are 40 years old are relatively young because the rest of them is much older. And the older generation still thinks about the European Union from the perspective of Polish People's Republic. When it comes to the government, well, it says nothing can happen to us in the European Union. We simply should be members of the European Union, should be treated them with respect because they did us so much harm during the Second World War and afterwards. This was said by President Duda in Leżajsk during his speech where he called the European Union a community that is based on imagination only, and he also said we suffered during World War II and after World War II. That's why we can count on the support of the European Union right now. According to me, other countries should also count on the support of the European Union, but they don't get any, for instance, Ukraine. So I would like this kind of thinking to vanish simply. And there is one more thing that is rooted in the thinking that was there in Polish People's Republic. Okay, we joined this Western club of democracy, of shared values, and as a result, this makes us stand somewhere outside this group. We need to prove we're good. We're still catching up with the rest. We need to prove that we belong there. And this does not function as well. Especially when it comes to the youngest generation, people can't remember what it was like during the communist times. You need to be 40 years of age or older to remember what it was like to live in Polish People's Republic. So this way of thinking, from the perspective of Euro enthusiasm, this way of thinking makes Poland an outsider. Those two perspectives are wrong. We need to change them. That's my expectations. We need to abandon these two ways of thinking. First of all, we can be members of the European Union. We get support from the European Union because they did us harm. And on the other hand, the second scenario that I talked about. And when it comes to treating the European Union as a sack full of money, well, I think it's the fault of both sides. Polish government says that's not true, that they give us so much money because they take away money from us through multinational companies. This was said by Morawiecki. Well, he said multinational companies take money away from us to a higher extent that the European Union provides us with subsidies. But the civic platform government thought about the European Union in the same way. Pawlak, who was vice prime minister at that time, he said we should squeeze the European Union like a lemon and we should get as much money from it as possible. So the way of thinking was the same under the previous government. So the European Union is treated as a sack full of money. And now the number of funds, the amount of funds will be decreasing. Poland will become a net contributor to the European Union, and we need to explain what are the benefits of belonging to a club that we need to pay for. It's usually the case that we are members of an organization, we need to pay membership fee, but I think that we will need to explain this to the Poles because they won't understand it. The European Union should not be treated as a foreign body that has some other values than we do, and we need to stop thinking about money, about subsidies, direct subsidies that we get. Maybe we should focus on indirect profits that we draw from the presence in the structures of the European Union, for instance, higher revenues, higher turnover. These two things might be interesting. And now, last but not least, the left-wing parties. Two issues, two answers. My expectations as to the campaign, well, in isolation from what I would like the campaign to include, I need to agree that it will mostly revolve around issues related to the rule of law, and the two main political camps will try to present a very visible conflict, existential questions, whether we should stay in the European Union, what are the European core values, and on the other hand, law and justice, which will defend its current politics, its current rhetorics, and the representative of the left-hand side of the political scene. I don't know whether it's going to be the case, but I hope that there will be third axis of narrative. I hope that we will take a step ahead and put forward a kind of vision that will be able to convince people, and taking into account low voter turnout rates. When it comes to EP elections, there are lots of people to be convinced. There are lots of, so to speak, swing states, so there's much room to improvement. There are many people who could be convinced, who could be attracted, who could be involved in elections. One important aspect is that you mentioned interest of states, interests of the European Union, and I think that we should rather talk about the interests of citizens. If we want to talk about the European Union, the desired state of the European Union, we should talk about the profits that ordinary people draw from the European Union. So we should talk about the interests of citizens and not the interests of the state or of the European Union. And I'm quite skeptical. I'm also a lawyer, but I don't fully believe that the story about European core values and the rule of law might attract masses. I don't believe it. I think this should be complemented by a social offer. And the story about social Europe could be something that would complement the offer that we come up with. And let me refer to what we've done, this small focus. We were trying to ask people whether they have any expectations, any ideas as to social politics, and it seems crucial that maybe they don't talk about it during polls. There are no automatic associations that social affairs could be that important at this level. So maybe not 500 plus at the European level, but something similar. And if we have a look at the latest barometer results, the biggest challenges for Union are migration and terrorism. But when it comes to the national level, the greatest challenges ahead of their states are unemployment and a lack of social security, healthcare, and so on and so forth. So it would be really important to include these threads in our debate, and the social dimension is what I think we should develop. Values are, of course, crucial, but we won't be able to convince people to be attracted only talking about values.
Thank you, Dominika. Now I've got the microphone, but I've got it only to let the audience ask questions. Of course, our panelists will have time to answer not only the questions posed by the audience, but also to refer to what the other panelists have said. And let's collect a few questions because the time is running. So let's collect a few questions now. Jan Jakub Chroniec, Battery Foundation. I would like to add one more issue. There was an article published in Gazeta Wyborcza Polish daily. It was written in 2009 by the German correspondent of that newspaper in Berlin. It was an article about how Poland did not benefit, did not use the full potential of reopening the Polish-German relationships. Why the Polish decision makers focus on two things: the symbols and history. And they talked about very abstract ideas like solidarity. Now, the German expectations were different. The German politicians expected very specific ideas for solving the European problems. And I think that Poland will not be empowered in the European Union as long as Polish politicians do not answer a very simple question, namely, how can Poland contribute to solving European problems? We need to contribute to that process intellectually as well. We cannot expect the Western elites to come up with ideas and then just make comments on those ideas proposed by the Western elites. We need to come up with our own ideas and propose them ourselves. And I think you should propose such ideas as well, because so far you, the panelists, have been making comments on how the situation is right now. But let's talk about what ideas Poland could contribute to the European integration project, and also what new ideas could Poland contribute to that European integration project, and how could we improve our bilateral relationships with Germany and France. Some people think that it is a bad time to talk about this because the decision makers from the current government are not interested. I think there is a point in this, but I think this is wrong. Because if you take a look at Macron, for example, Macron came up with the idea for his project a few years earlier. So you need to prepare in advance. Thank you very much. Another question over there? I think it's very difficult to find an answer to the question, what kind of Europe do you want to be part of, if we do not realize what the European crisis is all about. And I mean the crisis of the Western Europe. This is a crisis of ideas and a cultural crisis. These two crises are going on in Western Europe. And what is happening right now, we are at the border of the European Union. We are not in the middle of the European Union. We are on the border. And now the question could be, what can we contribute now that there is this crisis going on there? What could be our contribution? And now the question is also, how much solidarity can we give, can we offer for the sake of the success of the European project? What are we able to give up for the sake of solidarity with the European project? And we also need to realize that there is a global crisis that is playing a role in all of this too. The European Union will need to change because the natural driving force behind the European integration has come to an end. And you were talking about statistics, and you said that the Polish people mentioned healthcare and something else. What else did you mention? Healthcare and... Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, I did not hear what the panelists said. It was not said into a microphone. So it was about adopting the identity, the Western identity, which is about having a nice, comfortable life. This is something Polish people need mentally. However, we are not creative when it comes to changing the real world. In order to change it, you need to understand how it works. You need to describe the current situation, but you also need to understand the reasons behind the current situation. So there is a European crisis, and what are the reasons behind it? That would be the question. Any other comments? Any other questions? Someone in behind? I would like to ask about two things. First question would be, do you think that the migration policy will be a subject of the campaign in Poland and in Europe before the European elections? Question number 2. How do you like this initiative that emerged some time ago? It was an initiative which said that the European Commission should be able to support non-governmental organizations in the member states independently from the national governments. I mean, NGOs fighting for democracy and the rule of law. It was an idea supported very much by the Battery Foundation and by Polish members of the European Parliament. What would be your opinion on this issue? All right, so now it's your turn, our panelists. Let's start with Stanisław. Of course, I cannot refer to all the questions that have been asked, and also I do not think I'm competent to answer all of them. So I will just refer to some of them. Well, thank you for those questions, and you talked, one of the questions referred to the statistics I quoted. I do not agree with that comment. I think it's not about having a nice, comfortable life. It is also about having a decent life. That's how I would describe it. That would be the adjective I would go for. Many people in Poland still think that they do not have a decent life, or that having a decent life is something you cannot take for granted in Poland, and the healthcare would be a very good example. It is not about being comfortable, it is about having decent healthcare, and this is a fundamental right. We just granted in the Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union, and I think the rule of law requires constitutional patriotism, so we need to ensure that our courts are independent and there should be freedom of speech, but this should go hand in hand with ensuring that people have decent standards of living. And there was a very nice report published by the Helsinki Human Rights the Foundation, and it was a report about the European Court of the European Union, and the report said that the European Court of Justice is able to defend human rights in a much more efficient way than the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. And the title of the report was From Strasbourg to Luxembourg. So this shows how the European Union could be perceived as a defender of human rights. However, this is not highlighted enough nowadays. And I don't know if you understood me correctly, Jan. I am not saying that we should not propose any new ideas right now for the European integration. I just meant that it is unrealistic right now for Poland to enter the European agenda again as an important decision maker, because right now Poland is being criticized intensively, very intensively, for its crisis regarding the rule of law. And I think that we need more Europe for the world, and I also think that people need more European Union when it comes to public services and a certain guarantee that these public services have a decent standard. Okay, maybe let the other panelists say something as well, because we don't have that much time. All right, so Piotr, voice over to you.
Dobrze, to w takim razie, ja
Okay.
nie ukrywam, że ta wizja, którą Staszek przedstawia,
The vision presented by Staszek is a vision where I'm deeply convinced that if it was put into life, there would be no European Union at all in a couple of years. And I think that we should think about citizens. And if we should think about what would have to happen for people in France, in Germany, to have European Union, a community showing solidarity to Poland, to Ukraine and other countries. But in Poland, no one bothers about the National Judiciary Council, about the Supreme Courts, about the Constitutional Courts. All the reforms that were conducted by the Law and Justice Party did not change the fact that the support for this party is still that high. But from the perspective of people in other countries, that is really unimaginable. And I also think that financing NGOs on some supranational level is not the right way to go. If we want extreme movements to rise in power, we can do that, yeah. But if we want these voices to be of no importance for right-wing movements all over Europe, let's do this. And let's say, okay, they stole our state from us. They are pumping in some money in order to wash our brains. We should stay away from such ideas. Okay, we should embrace some innovative, bold ideas that could extend the area of debate. And when I heard Jarosław Kaczyński saying a couple of years ago during a conference that he commissioned his lawyers with writing the new treaty on the functioning of the European Union, well, I could not believe what I was hearing, but we need to remember all these issues. On the other hand, I can remember an interview with Stefan Kaczynski, and I asked him whether his book on decomposition of Eurozone, controlled decomposition of Eurozone, was sent to Trump. But I'm not an economist. I cannot evaluate his proposal on a scientific level, but I think that this way of thinking is necessary, and Poland is outside the Eurozone, and it could give this impetus for change. Łukasz, you said an interesting thing. You asked a fundamental question. What is a crisis of the European Union about? Not only European Union as an organization, international organization with 28 or rather 27 members, but what's the fundamental problem? The fundamental problem of European Union is the problem with identity. This identity is, let me emphasize this, very complex one, ecumenic one. It encompasses lots of different streams, Rome, further conservative issues, socialist perspective, Spinoza, John from the Cross, and so on and so forth. This is the area of solidarity, inclusive solidarity. This is a kind of psychotherapy, and the condition for the patient to get better is to believe that he or she can get better. And of course, there have always been problems, there has always been discrimination, but at the same time, it is the place where the most progressive, bold, philosophical, cultural trends were born. The mere idea of equality, gender equality. It was not established in Asia. It was established in the European culture, so we have to get back to our roots, to our traditions. So that's the main question concerning the crisis of the European Union. This crisis results from the lack of faith in our own identity. We talked a lot about the relations of Poland and the European Union, about the ideas as to what Poland can contribute to the European Union, but I think that we should take a broad European perspective. When we talk about Europe, we talk about people from Spain, Poland, Hungary, France. We should not be afraid of our own identity in a very healthy sense, identity which is inclusive, which encompasses all the representatives of Europe. And I would agree with Dominika said, and with what other speakers said. When I talk about Europe as a community of solidarity, what I understood under solidarity is some kind of social solidarity that was one of the roots of this European project from the very beginning of the European Union. The consensus that laid the foundations for the European Union during the times of the Cold War was this post-war consensus of the two most important political streams, center-right and social democracy. For instance, in Germany, of course, there were controversies between these two forces, between Christian Democrats, between Social Democrats, between the Gaullists in France, laborers and conservatives in Great Britain. But there was this common conviction that the foundations for the European Union are functioning institutions, healthcare for everyone, social benefit system. These things lay the foundations for European Union. So on the one hand, Europe needs to believe in its complex identity, and it needs to believe in complexity of its identity and in solidarity. So if we do not regain faith in rebuilding this kind of Europe, we are not going to go in the right direction. We will be stuck in some procedural discussions, technical discussions, detailed discussions. But it's time to ask the fundamental question: what is this European project for? What do we want to offer to the world?
Now, Dominika and Łukasz, could you please refer to the question regarding the rule of law? Thank you. Well, I am not. Well, I would like to stress the following thing. I think I was misunderstood. I would not support trading, selling values for social benefits. So what Stanisław was saying is quite close to how I see it. We need an equality revolution, and it should be a narrative about a decent standard of life. It really worked in 2015, so maybe we could use that narrative again in our current situation to talk about how we should remain a member of the European Union and about why and how we should contribute more to the European project. And Poland should, of course, start planning right now in advance. If we think that the government will change in Poland, we should start planning for that period right now, because there is no way back to the role that Poland used to have in the European Union before 2015, because Poland back at that time was perceived as a very successful young member state of the European Union. But this is gone, and there is no way that we will have that position again. And to win some credibility on the European level, we need to use the opportunity that that could be learning from our mistakes, because as I understand, some of the people, some of the panelists agree that the current politics of the Polish government is not in compliance with the European values, and we have a problem because the instrument of check and balances does not work. And now I would like to refer to the values. This is something that gives us safety. So I would not see this as a danger, as a political mistake. I think that we need to make sure that the values are complied with. And we are all, well, we all work for non-governmental organizations, but I am also a representative of a left-wing think tank, and I would see this as an opportunity. Thank you. Well, the rule of law, but there was also a question about migration. Will this topic come back? I think it will come back, but it will be debated even more intensively, and we will not be talking about migration as such, we'll be talking about sovereignty. Because even if we talk about migration, I think we really talk about sovereignty and about whether member states should make their own decisions as regards migration or not. And the government often says that we should have a European Union based on the national states. I think this is a very stupid slogan, but it is there. And I read an article written by Paweł Kowal, and this is exactly the idea that will be very bad for Poland, because if we strengthen the sovereignty of the national states, the most powerful states will benefit from this, and we are not among those most powerful states. So if we minimize the competences of the European Union and increase the competence of the national states, this will not be beneficial for Poland, because this will be beneficial for the most powerful states, and Poland is not one of them. However, the Polish government still believes that it is only a national state that can take care of the interests of the people living in that country, which I would disagree with. So it's mostly about the question of sovereignty, and Steve Bannon is now trying to establish a new coalition, international coalition. If Salvini works with Orban, this could be the beginning of it. But I think that Poland has indeed contributed to reforming the European Union, because the decisions that are made with regard to Poland in Brussels are unprecedented. So that is the way we contribute to the European integration. Now the European Court of Justice will make a decision regarding Poland, and the court will need to decide whether it has the competence to deal with that question that has been posed, and this will develop the European project even further. However, we should remember that even if the Supreme Court says something about homosexual marriage, for example, or abortion, the liberals in the United States thought that this would give us an ultimate guarantee that this decision stays. However, this cannot be taken for granted in such a situation, because a court does not have an army to make sure that its rulings are observed. So it is not enough for a Supreme Court to say that homosexual marriages should be introduced, for example. We also need instruments that will make sure that these rulings are observed, are implemented. And we need the same for the European project and the European Court of Justice. And many people say that right now there is a struggle in the European Union between those normal people and the populists. And that's how we see the coming campaign before the European elections, as a struggle, as a fight between those who are normal and the populists. But the economists suggested a different division. It could be seen as a fight between the institutionalists, the conservatives and the reformers in the field of institutions. And Macron, Salvini, Orban, they are all reformers. They are not conservatives when it comes to institutions. So I like this division a lot for one reason. The credibility of certain candidates that will stand for election is limited. If we have Manfred Weber saying that he is someone that would renew the European Union, this is zero credibility. You can say easily you've accepted so many wrong developments and things for such a long time. So how can you now say that you're going to renew the European Union? This is zero credibility. So even if you support the European project, you cannot help much because that man has no credibility. So I think that it is a key issue for the continuation of the European project, and I wish that the European Union would increase its powers and not limit it. So we need credibility, and the court alone will not help you.
I need to give you the floor as well. Well, I use this term, and well, I would like the European Union to be able to do more, and I would like the functioning of countries within the European Union to be more meaningful than it is today. Thank you very much. I have the impression we had a really interesting discussion that delivered on its promise to provide us with some tension, maybe not that much, but there really was some tension between the way you accentuate different things. Thank you very much for your interesting inputs and the culture of debate. Despite some differences in the way of thinking, some ideological differences, the culture of debate was really, really high. I hope that this edition of The World in Focus was really interesting, very diverse, and I would like to extend my thanks not only to the panelists but also to all the participants who took part in our seminars during the last 2 days. On behalf of the European Council of Foreign Relations, I would like to thank the other co-organizer, the Heinrich Böll Foundation, and together with Irene, we would like to thank the capital city of Warsaw for hosting us in this Center of Creativity in Prague. And that would be it, unless Irene would like to add anything. Let me just thank the panelists and participants, and I hope you will take part in next year's edition as well. Thank you, and I wish you a nice weekend.
Do zobaczenia.
See you next year.